Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this review. Today we got an early look at SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy, or as I like to call it, Queen of Fighters. Now if you think this is just a King of Fighters clone, I think you'll be surprised by the direction they went with it, and not just the obvious ecchi one. So let's check it out. SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy is a 2-on-2 tag team crossover all-female fighting game by SNK. So let's start with a quick history lesson for SNK Heroines for those who aren't really into those niche fighters. SNK is the company that most closely rivaled Capcom in its fighting game output, both in terms of quality and quantity, but not quite in popularity. They made a real splash with their multi-game arcade cabinets and arcade fighters, as well as their own home console, the Neo Geo. They launched a number of fighting series in the 90s, including Art of Fighting, Fatal Fury, Samurai Showdown, World Heroes, and more. Their fighting games were well received by hardcore fighting fans, and known for their deep and hard-to-master gameplay. And for us casuals, they were also known by their unfair single-player bosses. The company is no stranger to crossover fighters, combining characters from those series into their biggest franchise, the King of Fighters, which has gone on for 14 main games and a ton of spin-offs. They also had a previous 2-on-2 crossover fighter with Neo Geo Battle Coliseum on the PS2, as well as an all-female fighter in the very rare Gals fighter for the Neo Geo Pocket. I was lucky to check out this game early because NIS America sent me a code for review. I'm doing the PS4 version, which is my preferred platform for fighters, so I can't speak to the game's performance on Switch. It is worth noting, however, that the game will only be available digitally on the PS4 since the Switch is getting the physical exclusive. Also, I'm not a hardcore fighting game player. You won't catch me at EVO, my local fighting game tournaments, or even playing much online. I'm a fully admitted scrub. I love fighting games, I love the designs, the characters, mechanics, and even the stories, but I'm not the kind of player who dedicates himself to a game long enough to completely learn it inside and out to compete. I'm the kind of player who goes through the single player content, plays against friends who are at a similar skill level, and then goes online for the brutal reminder of just how casual a fighting game fan I am. So in this review, I'm not going to be talking about frame data, footsies, or the metagame here. My aim is to tell other casuals what they might like or dislike about the game compared to other more recent fighters. Based on the roster, which we'll get to in a bit, you'd think this was a quick reskin of King of Fighters 14, but that couldn't be further from the truth. So much has changed from KOF 14 that make this a very different game. I'm going to compare it to King of Fighters 14 a lot since I think that's the best point of comparison. So first up are the major visual changes. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The character models and costumes are hypersexualized. SNK Heroines cranks the fan service up to 11, but if all you checked out was that character artwork, you'd think that's all there was to the game's visual design. To see the game in motion though is something really different. The stages add some elegance to the visual look, while the sound design and special effects bring an insane amount of cute to the overall visuals. Your punches and kicks explode with fruits, animals, stars, just all kinds of crazy stuff that come out that really add a lot of visual interest to the game. All this stuff balances out the sexy character outfits to make a surprisingly fun style. It's also worth noting that this does tie into the story in a really interesting way. It's not going to justify it for people who are against the character's portrayals, but it does take the obvious selling points of that style and calls it out for what it is. I'd like to go more into the story, but there's so little of it I don't want to ruin absolutely anything for fans who want to check it out. I will just say it's a quick, silly, fun idea. I wish there was more of it. I know the game's goal is to keep it as lighthearted as possible, but there was an opportunity here to flesh it out and explore some really interesting ideas and play with some expectations. As it stands, the story is really short, told over like 4 quick scenes, mostly played for comedy. The story mode is closer to an arcade mode than most modern fighters, and even shorter than King of Fighters 14's also arcade-like story mode. It has the player pick their 2 characters and go through 7 fights. The last fight is a non-playable boss character who also came from KOF 14 and is a bit tougher from the previous fights, but nothing nearly as unfair as typical SNK bosses. After clearing the game, you'll get character endings for your 2 characters, which are basically just anime-style artwork over the credits. This stuff really references their characters, so if you aren't too familiar with King of Fighters and that roster, it may interest you to play the other games, and some of the stuff might be lost on you, but it's still fun to see. With that, you'll want to play the story mode at least 7 times to see all of the endings. There's also a couple extra pieces of artwork in the gallery that are unlocked if you complete the game with a specific pair of heroines, so it's worth checking that stuff out. And they put a lot of work into unique dialogue for all the character pairs in between fights, so that's worth checking out. For real completionists, you can unlock the dialogue scenes for each combination of characters through the story, but that means playing through the game with each combination of characters, which is about 90 times. The story mode has 5 difficulty settings, and aside from that and the quick tutorial, there's versus, survival, training, and online modes. Like every other fighter, you can battle a friend in local versus mode, but you can also team up with a friend and take down the CPU in that and other modes. Basically, each player controls one of the characters on your team and you tag out between players. The online mode includes quick matches and rooms. For quick matches, you can choose to play a standard match or a gamble match where you bet some of your in-game coins against your opponent. I can't quite speak to the online mode at the time of this review, I just couldn't get into any matches since the game hasn't come out yet, so check the description below for a quick comment on how online performs after the game's release. There's also a customization mode which we'll get into later. The gameplay itself might seem similar to King of Fighters 14, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Let's start with the controls. For movement, you still move, dash, and jump as you would expect from a modern fighter, but there's no crouching, which was a big surprise. The attack buttons have been simplified. Instead of light and heavy kicks and punches, you get one light and one heavy button. There's also a dedicated throw button. The fourth face button is the most surprising. This special button performs a special move based on what direction you're holding when you press it. This gives the player instant access to all of their special moves without having to mess around with control inputs like quarter circles or charge attacks. Lastly, another huge change, block is its own dedicated button, L1, instead of back, which took me a ton of time to get used to. You can also use it to perform evade rolls and recoveries. All those changes might seem pretty strange, but I think they reveal exactly how SNK wanted to make a fighter that was accessible to more players. This is basically King of Fighters meets Super Smash Bros., with a little bit of Arc System Works fighting game mechanics mixed in. The Super Smash Bros. Comparison will become way more obvious as I get into more of these gameplay changes, so let's get into those. Being a 2-on-2 fighter, you can swap out your characters at any time. Both characters share a health bar, so the main benefit of this is to manage your spirit gauge, as the player who's not in use has their gauge refill much faster than the active player. You can also cancel a move into a tag, which uses up part of your spirit gauge, but is a great way to extend your combos. The spirit gauge is a super important resource, and a lot of the gameplay revolves around managing it. The health bar is actually really confusing at first as well, because half of it is your spirit gauge, and as you take damage, you'll be able to stock up more spirit. Using special moves take up some of your spirit gauge as well. When you're low on spirit, you can still use your special moves, but they're weakened and pretty much useless. This is one aspect of the gameplay I really don't like, because it kept me from using my special attacks most of the time. Whereas in other games, you can kind of pull out your special moves whenever you need them, you have to be really careful here because your spirit is really important. This is because you don't actually win a fight by taking your opponent's health down to 0. Instead, you have to get their health bar near 0 to put them in a critical state, and then you have to hit them with a dream finish to knock them out and actually win. The dream finish is done just by pressing R2, so no execution issues there, but it can be blocked or dodged. You can also keep attacking your opponent to get their health down to 0, which stuns them, and gives you a chance to get a guaranteed hit with your dream finish. Your dream finish takes up a huge amount of your spirit gauge though, so you gotta make sure you have enough, at least with one of your characters, to pull it off. As if that wasn't Smash Bros. Enough, there's also items. Item orbs are plentiful in each fight, and you just have to hit one to pick it up. You'll get a random item which your support character will use from the background when you use the right analog stick. Depending on the item, the way you move the stick will determine what the item does. There's items that will hurt your opponent, set up traps for them, restore your stamina or health, and just have all kinds of interesting benefits. You can turn off items from the menu if you don't like them, and you can set how frequent they show up because you get a ton during a standard match at the default setting. To bring it all back, the game features a variety of evades, cancels, and reversal techniques much like a modern fighter, so don't think it's as simple as it sounds. There's still combos to figure out and a ton of techniques for moving around and dealing with attacks. Really, the game just simplifies the attack buttons and lets you not worry about the execution of your special moves. Overall, it's a really interesting mix of a modern fighter like King of Fighters or Blaze Blue with the accessible to anyone philosophy of Smash Bros.
Ready, go!
目を隠してハンデのつもりか。まったくナコルルに出会ってからこっち退屈しなくていいよ。
There's 14 playable fighters in the game, and almost all of them were from King of Fighters 14. We got Athena, Mai, Nakoruru, Yuri, Loveheart, and Mimi, who started off in other SNK franchises before being in King of Fighters. Shermie, Kula, and Leona premiered in older KOF games, and Shermie is the only character in Heroines who wasn't in KOF 14. Zarina, Mian, Luang, and Sylvia were new characters who were introduced in King of Fighters 14. And finally, a female version of Fatal Fury's Terry Bogart, who was in KOF 14 as a male but has now gone all gender swap for this title, has a pretty interesting but tiny implication on the story.
こんな姿アンディやジョーには見せられないな。
Overall, it's a decent number of characters, but it's really disappointing that so many were from KOF 14. These crossover games are generally a great opportunity to bring in new characters and niche characters from a company. It really doesn't feel as special since KOF is already a crossover series. The roster really does seem more like a Queen of Fighters than SNK Heroines. I'd love to see stuff like Akari from Last Blade or Eri from Metal Slug. We need fun characters like that who haven't been in King of Fighters to round out this roster. They have announced some DLC, and so far the first one is a really strange, but I guess it fits that mold. Thief Arthur, who is a guest character from Square Enix's Million Arthur Japanese mobile series. They've also hinted at another character here. I'll show the silhouette on screen, but we don't know who this is yet, and we don't know how many characters they're going to have as DLC. I do hope we get a bunch of fun and interesting characters and not just more KOF fighters. Let's get into progression. Aside from getting all the endings from story mode, there is a variety of unlocks that come from just playing the game. Stuff is constantly unlocking, but it's mostly story cinematics and audio from the gallery. You'll also be earning coins as you play through the game and can use these to purchase all kinds of costumes, accessories, gallery items, and titles. Some things are unlocked through regular play, but the majority of stuff you'd want you need coins to unlock. You do get them at a good rate though. It's not too much of a grind to unlock pretty much anything you'd want just by playing story mode. That brings us to the customization options. The game lets you customize your characters in some really cool ways. Each character has 2 additional costumes that can be unlocked, and each of their 3 costumes have 4 different colors. There's also a number of accessories you can purchase to set up on your character's head, face, back, hip, wrists, and ankles. These things can really help change up the look of a character. You can also use coins to buy a series of backgrounds, frames, stamps, poses, and expressions to create custom artwork that you can save and capture using the PS4 share button. And more importantly, you can use them in-game to create custom avatars for your profile. There's a lot you can do here, which is great for creating avatars, but I have one really big gripe with it. The avatars that you generate from your artwork are only taken from the middle section of the screen. You can't change the focus of it, so when you have really interesting backgrounds where you want to put your character on the right side and take some pictures and set up a frame, those things just don't work well for the avatar system. So that's a real shame, and it's a surprising limitation given how much options the rest of this mode has. So that's SNK Heroines. For hardcore KOF fighters, you'll likely have a tough time adjusting because of how different it is. I can't really recommend it to hardcore fighting fans because of how scaled back it is, but that's what actually makes it a great game for newcomers to SNK fighters. Many fighters have tried to onboard casuals recently with things like auto combos and easy specials as seen in games like Persona Arena and Dragon Ball FighterZ, but those are still really hardcore fighters with a ton of techniques and maneuvers that it's easy to get discouraged while playing. SNK Heroines is possibly the most accessible fighter for players who are new or have had trouble with the genre in the past. It does away with the gameplay aspects that make it hard to pick up and let you focus on the basics. The 2-button scheme can really help players prone to button mashing learn to be a bit more targeted with their attacks. While it can help you get started learning faster than other fighters, it would have been nicer if there was also a bit of a combo trainer to help take new players even further. For those who play SNK fighters for the story and characters, it's neat to see how those characters are utilized here and how they act in this unique situation. But the story isn't quite as big of a draw as it should be.
Finish! You win!
その動き、元はカポエイラだよね。自分なりのアレンジって加えてみたくなるよね。
SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy releases tomorrow, September 7th, 2018, as a digital download on PS4 and both physically and digitally on the Nintendo Switch. There was an agreement between SNK and Nintendo, which is why that's the case, and while I think this game seems more in line with the PS4 library, I hope it works in SNK's favor to get a good audience of newcomers to their games on the Switch. Given the similarities to Smash Bros., it's easy to see why they might have thought that's a good option. There's also a limited special edition through the NIS America and SNK online stores. There were some stock left at the time of writing this, so check that out if you're interested.
Finish! Player 1 wins!
ゆりさんの頑張りはきっとお兄さんにも伝わりますよ。
One mistake I made I gotta clear up, there actually is a physical PS4 version, but you have to get the special edition through the NIS America or SNK online store. So there were a couple of them left when I did this review. Check that out if you're a collector and really want that. I think that might be a sought after piece in a couple of years. But yeah, thanks for checking out this review. We're trying out some new format stuff with the reviews, so let me know if you like that stuff. If you do pick up SNK Heroines or are thinking about picking it up, let me know in the comments your thoughts. I'll see you guys next time.